Warning, this video is going to contain significant spoilers for the entirety of the Magnus Archives, predecessor to the Magnus Protocol. If you haven't listened to TMA yet, you really should, because it's a great podcast that'll be worth the time investment. Just bookmark this page and go listen to it through your service of choice. This video will also contain spoilers for the Magnus Protocol ARG, but will not contain any spoilers for the TMP paid premiere, as I haven't listened to it yet. Everything contained in this video is available through public information sources. Hey y'all, I'm Afton G Kier, and this is probably not the video you were expecting today. For what it's worth, this isn't the video I was expecting for today either. My original plan was to release a full analysis of the Magnus Archives, but it turns out that breaking down an entire 200-episode podcast in one video takes a lot longer than expected, meaning that, as so often happens, I had bitten off more than I could chew. In the end, I pushed that video back and instead decided to try my hand at predicting the future. I've been meaning to make a video about what I think will happen in Protocol, but I've never really had the time for it. Fortunately for that idea, the perfect time slot just opened up, so subscribe if you're new, and let's try to figure out what's going on in the Magnus Protocol before it even premieres. Rather than jumping straight into what I think the series is going to be, I want to lay out the facts and some groundwork theories first regarding what might be going on. As I've discovered in writing the script, it's really hard to propose a story without a baseline for what any of the story's elements mean. Most of the direct information is pulled from presentations the Rusty Quill team have done about Protocol, from descriptions about Protocol, or from the official Protocol ARG, along with some speculation of my own. The best place to start is likely with the relationship between this story and its predecessor, the Magnus Archives. While Protocol is sometimes referred to as the Magnus Archives 2, even series co-creator and Rusty Quill CEO Alexander J. Newell admits that the term sequel doesn't quite fit it, instead opting for the head writer Johnny Sims's preferred term, sidequel. Chronologically, yes, Protocol seems to take place in the year 2023, while TMA concluded somewhere in 2018, if you don't consider the time strangeness caused by the change. Thus, TMP is literally taking place after TMA, but I find it very likely that the chronology of archives will be insignificant to the story of Protocol, as TMP will be taking place in an alternate universe. As Annabelle Kane unveiled in Mag 197 Connected, the Magnus Archives took place in one world out of a possibly infinite amount, and the web's plan was to escape from the reality of TMA into a multitude of other worlds just beyond the gap in reality under Hilltop Road. In the end, the web's plan succeeded, and while we're still not totally sure what that means, it seems likely that the powers now exist in these alternate realities. Given the several timeline inconsistencies we've already been made aware of, the most significant surrounding the Magnus Institute itself, I feel inclined to say that Protocol is taking place in one of these alternate realities. The only thorn in my side is a single line from Rusty Quill's official page on the Magnus Protocol, which reads, "The Magnus Archives 2, otherwise known as the Magnus Protocol, is planned to be 3 additional seasons within the universe of the Magnus Archives." That wording feels very intentional, and leaves me just a bit uncertain about the commonly accepted conclusion. Fortunately, I think we can get a better understanding of the intended meaning of this phrase in the Protocol Kickstarter launch video, in which Alexander J. Newell refers to Protocol as a continuation of the Magnus verse. That term seems much more in line with the idea of an alternate universe, so I think that Protocol will be taking place in another reality. If this is a world that the fears were introduced to post-Archives, it seems to have either occurred very early in their timeline, or it was a retrospective change, as I believe it's very likely that the entities are not something new. We do get to see a very small piece of one alternate world in Mag 114, Cracked Foundation, but I can't be sure at this point whether the reality of Protocol will be the same reality Anya Villette came from. From a narrative standpoint, I could see it being an interesting detail, but I don't see much value in that revelation. Unfortunately, Rusty Quill has been a bit tight-lipped about the plot of Protocol, which means I'm mostly shooting in the dark here, but I'll do my best. We know that our protagonists are Alice Dyer and Samama Khalid, whose low-level work in the Office of Incident Assessment and Response will bring them into contact with the legacy of the Magnus Institute, Manchester. A good place to start is probably the characters. Alice and Sam seem to have known each other in college, implying that they have some sort of history. Johnny and Alex have described their jobs as essentially data entry, and we know that they're working for a government organization, but there's really not a whole lot else. One of the few other pieces of information is going to be discussed later when I talk about the ARG, but for now, keep in mind that at the very least Sam, if not both of them, appear in a study of gifted children. The reason I can't say both for certain is that, while we have the full list, the Dyer child in question is Connor Dyer. I think this is probably Alice under a dead name, since Johnny has confirmed that Alice is trans. To me, it would make more story sense if this child was Alice herself rather than, say, a sibling or a cousin, purely for the intentional symmetry of having both main characters appear in the records of the Magnus Institute Manchester, but technically it's just speculation. I think that covers everything we know about Alice and Sam, but since we're already talking about characters, let's look at a few other interesting names. Of all the names in the cast, one that stuck out immediately to fans of the original series was Gwendolyn BOUCHARD. Elias BOUCHARD was the final host of Jonah Magnus's consciousness in the world of TMA, but we never really get to know that much about the original Elias because he got his eyes scooped out and his consciousness overridden by a 200-year-old man before the series even started. Really, all we know is that he came from a wealthy family, was a bit of a stoner, was trying to get into the cushiest position for the least amount of work, and had witnessed his roommate, Alan, go mad and die over a book of beholding. Astonishingly, we somehow have even less to go on for Gwendolyn BOUCHARD, basically just knowing the name. Gwendolyn is the third character in the reveal lineup, right behind Alice and Sam, so it seems likely that she's going to be very important to the plot. As for who Gwendolyn is, my guess is on her being some relative of the original Elias. Maybe a daughter or a sister, or if you really want to piss off the Lonely Eye shippers, a wife. I have also heard a theory circulating that Gwendolyn might be trans original Elias, which is too great not to mention. What I'm not sure about is whether Gwendolyn is going to be possessed by this universe's Jonah Magnus or not. I find it very unlikely, given that the Magnus Institute doesn't really exist in the same capacity as it did in the TMA universe, but it's not necessarily impossible. Another of the fairly normal characters I want to call out is Colin Becker, because the ARG features an OIAR employee named Colin, who may be the same Colin that ran a collection of codes. That code library eventually led to the Magnus Institute Manchester records, which implies a degree of connection. I'm not sure what role Colin will play in the final series, but there does seem to be something there. The most overlooked but arguably most interesting named character of the lineup is Lorianne Davies' character, Celia Ripley. If that pair of names is setting off alarm bells in your head, it's probably because we've already heard of a character named Celia who was voiced by Lorianne Davies in the original series. Formerly known as Lynn Hammond, the now nameless woman was rescued from what was likely a stranger domain by Melanie King and Georgie Barker, taking on the name Celia to replace the identity stolen from her. This might just be a fun little nod, but it does feel significant. I obviously doubt that Celia Ripley and post-change Celia are the same person, but there's definitely something there. Celia's pre-change statement might give us some hints, as it had to do with a fire ghost that I've long theorized to be the remnants of Agnes Montague. Given the amount of desolation imagery we've been seeing in association with Protocol, perhaps this is meant to be a hint. Now I have to talk about the three nameless characters, played by Jonathan Sims, Alexander J. Newell, and Tim Fearon. There are fragments of the original names in the jumbled mess, but it's very hard to make anything out. Still, I can't shake the feeling that they look concerningly like John, Martin, and Jonah. Yes, I think these three may very well be playing three returning characters, and what's more, I think I might have been right in a very early Protocol theory of mine. Back when the original teaser for TMA2 came out, I believed that we would wind up seeing John and Martin again, but that John would be trapped as a spirit in the tape recorders. I gave up on that theory pretty quickly, especially as later information presented itself, but I'm now wondering if I might have been more correct than I could have ever known. If we look at the opening sequence of the trailer and the Bonzo video shown in the MCM 2023 panel, we see the videos are running on jmj.mag 2023 beta. To drill this idea home, it also specifically calls out initializing J.01, OK. Initializing M.01, OK. Initializing J.02, OK. It then finds primary and secondary masters and slaves, which are technological terms used to describe programs that control multiple other programs. I find it likely that J, M, and J are John or Jonah, Martin, and Jonah or John, and that the master programs in question which the computer can't seem to find are their respective entities. Yes, I think we've got ghosts in the machines. Another hint towards this idea can be found in the ARG, where several phrases suspiciously similar to Sergei Yushchenko's cries of digitized anguish appear. Yushchenko was, of course, a manifestation of the spiral, or perhaps the extinction, taking the form of a man who transferred his consciousness into a computer, appearing in Mag65 binary. I think the biggest question at this point is why Jonah is being voiced by someone new, but I suppose that the computers might be channeling the voice of the original Jonah Magnus, rather than the stolen voice of Elias Bouchard. While I personally would have preferred it if John, Martin, and Jonah were dead, I think this is a really good and interesting way to bring them back. At the very least, if Jonah is indeed returning, I'm probably most excited about that, as I think he'll create much needed balance between the other two characters. Since we're done talking about Magnus himself, let's move over to his institute. The Magnus Institute in the original series was a research organization which investigated reports of the paranormal and supernatural. It was located in London, which immediately sets it apart from what we know about the Magnus Institute in the world of Protocol. The Magnus Institute Manchester was also devoted to academic research of the paranormal, as we see in the official series description, but it burned to the ground in 1999, leaving no survivors. Our biggest pieces of information about it come in the form of a study they apparently performed on several gifted children. Described as psychological tests, it seemed to measure the morality, empathy, and most concerningly obedience of those involved. As mentioned earlier, Sam Khalid and Alex Dyer both possibly appeared on the sheet. Sam had very high cognitive and emotional development, getting a 98% in empathy, the highest score in the entire group. He also scored highly in the Milgram test, which measured obedience to authority, though it's unclear if the high score means he was particularly obedient or disobedient. The Dyer child, who I believe to be Alice, also had quite high cognitive development, but had lower emotional and empathetic scores, along with a low in the Milgram test. The final name that really sticks out is Gerard f***ing Key. Jerry scored similarly to Sam, save for the fact that he had slightly lower empathy at 95% and a low obedience score. Does this mean that the keys are going to return in Protocol? I have no idea, but it certainly seems like it could have interesting implications. Going back to the burning of the Magnus Institute Manchester, that feels like an important moment, and could help contribute to the theory that the fears didn't suddenly appear in this world, but were either retroactively added to its history, or appeared right as it began, both of which are functionally the same for our purposes. Obviously, the Institute's presence could indicate that, but I also think that the cause of the fire may be at play. Based on all of the fire imagery, the abundant presence of alchemical sulfur symbols, which are commonly associated with the element of fire, and other possible clues, I believe that the desolation will have a much larger part to play in this story. One idea put forward by fellow Magnus tuber Pink Elohi in their really helpful video on the TMP ARG is the possibility that Agnes Montague might come back. Pointing to Anya Villette's statement, they noticed that Villette saw a strange tree in the garden of Hilltop Road in her original universe. This tree in the world of TMA was inexorably linked to Agnes Montague in some way, and would have likely been removed in the TMA world by the time of her statement, though Ivo Lensic and Father Burroughs' statements are a chronological disaster. Regardless, if the tree still stands in her world, it could be an indication that Agnes Montague was alive and well. The biggest issue with this theory is that the events of the statement take place before the change, so the powers wouldn't have escaped yet, but the timey-wimey nonsense of the Eldritch Fear Gods could be used to explain away that problem. If it's somehow revealed that the world of Protocol is the same as the home world of Anya Valette, then I wouldn't be surprised to see Agnes or the rest of the Cult of the Lightless Flame turn up in a more inflammatory role. The fact that Johnny said not doing more with Agnes was one of his main regrets in TMA could also make for some decent support to that theory. If the Desolation is a major player in this story, I find it likely that they were involved in the burning of the Institute, perhaps as a way to get back at Gertrude Robinson, if she even existed in this world. There is one thing you will notice I have not talked about yet, and that is Bonzoland. If you're not sure what Bonzoland is, let me catch you up to speed. While the ARG was going on, one of the main hints was towards the website of an amusement park called Bonzoland, with their ever-lovable mascot, Mr. Bonzo. Bonzo seems at first to be a normal park mascot, but coming face-to-face with the suit presents a less-than-normal reality, as you may have guessed from the speed paint under my words. This obvious Mr. Blobby ripoff is definitely something. If I had to place a bet on where Bonzo fits into all of this, my guess would be that he's probably just going to feature in an episode or two, but isn't going to play a major role. At most, he'll be the primary focus of Season 1, but even that feels like a bit of a stretch. Oh, and by the way, there was a real version of Bonzoland called Crinkly Bottom, which starred the not-at-all nightmare-inducing children's television host, Mr. Blobby. The park was eventually abandoned, and went on to inspire a surprisingly popular creepypasta called the Blobbyland Incident. Yes, really. However, I think Bonzo might be a single piece of a much larger puzzle, which is the story beat I've been hoping for since TMA Season 4, The Return of the Extinction. Call it wishful thinking, but when I look at the bulbous buboes covering Mr. Bonzo's body, my mind immediately goes to the way irradiated bodies are sometimes depicted in all sorts of media. I could also see a strong argument for corruption, given that I did just call them buboes, or stranger, since any sort of suited park mascot is really going to fit that bill, but I think Bonzo might instead be some terrible mutant. Yes, really. Am I crazy? Am I reaching? I don't know. I'm holding firm, though, that I think the ultimate threat of the Magnus Protocol is going to be the Extinction. If JMJ are trapped in the tech, even better. That's just another point in the Extinction tally. Finally, I just want to throw out a few crackpot theories which won't make it into my completed story, but would be very interesting. I think Alex will finally get his submarine episode, since he apparently wanted to do something with a submarine since very early in TMA. As someone who hates large bodies of water and thinks submarines are terrifying metal sea coffins, I definitely think there's a lot to work with there. I think the Fears might get a new organization, since John, Martin, and Jonah will be around to share Smirks 14 with Sam and Alice, but news of the system probably won't spread that much further. I've been meaning to make a video about alternate splittings and whether Season 5 of TMA proved Smirk's theory, but I'd be overjoyed if that all happened. At the very least, it'd give me plenty more to talk about. Speaking of Season 5, we get implications near the end of the series that the Fears might not originate from the world of TMA, so my really out there theory is that the world of Protocol may have already had the Fears there. While everything is different, the changes haven't been confirmed to be the result of the entities not existing, so maybe this new world is either going to already have its own version of the things that were Fear, or will have some equivalent to them. Maybe we'll even get to see a conflict between the Fears brought by JMJ to the Protocol world and the entities already existing there, who knows? Again, all of these were my border theories. If even one of them is proven right, y'all will never hear the end of it. With all of that done, I want to make my big prediction, so it's finally time to stitch it all together and see what comes out the other side. When the entities were dragged through the Terran reality under Hilltop Road, they carried the Archivist, Martin Blackwood, and Jonah Magnus with them, popping out the other side in what was originally the home world of Anya Valette. Maybe the world changes in some catastrophic moment, but more likely, I think they simply fade into the background, and their new world will begin to change around them. Maybe history rewrites itself, but I could also see the reality of the supernatural being a very new development. Jumping over to the Office of Incident Assessment and Response, Sam has just been recommended for a data entry position by his childhood friend Alice, who he met during a study at the now-destroyed Magnus Institute, Manchester. He got the job after a brief interview with the program director Lena Kelly, in which he reveals that he has witnessed something terrible. While working his way through the incidents recorded by the OIAR, he finds a number of files related to the Magnus Institute, perhaps provided to him by his co-worker Colin, or perhaps lightly pushed by a mysterious computer program. Regardless, he's opened Pandora's box, and now the darker forces hiding in the wings of the world have their eyes on him. Sam, teaming up with his old friend Alice, sets out to explain the mysterious and seemingly supernatural incident reports which seem to be pouring in, getting information from the voices of the JMJ program. Throughout the series, there will be a constant pressure from the followers of the Desolation, possibly led by a surviving Agnes Montague, and the dynamic duo will eventually discover that the emergence of the Extinction is growing very close. Obviously, Johnny will kill a lot of people along the way, as he tends to do, including, I think, Sam himself at some point before the climax of the story. I think Alice will then find some way to either banish the fears or at least stop the emergence of the Extinction, possibly succumbing to one of the entities in the process as either a victim or an avatar. I think JMJ will probably either escape the computer in some way, inhabiting the bodies of their alternate versions perhaps, or they will be destroyed. I think Annabelle Kane might be around, though the fact that she wasn't actively dying might grant her more freedom than the technologically limited JMJ. I think Colin will definitely die in Season 1, though I have no reason to believe that. I think Lady Mowbray will be revealed to be a new avatar and will serve some antagonistic role, because she's rich in a story written by Johnny Sims, and has a name like Lady Mowbray. I think Lena Kelly will run the OIAR and do it quite well, though she's definitely going to become some sort of avatar, and I think Gwendolyn BOUCHARD will exist. I really can't say much more about her, to be honest. They could take her any direction. I do think the original Elias will show up though, and I can't exclude the possibility that she will be Gwendolyn. I have no idea what's going on with Celia and Teddy. I think Bonzo will do terrible things to several people, and overall I think it's just gonna be a lot of fun. Maybe some of these predictions will come true. Probably not, but I can always hope. Oh, one last prediction. I think the massive disaster taking the lives of a ton of people that Johnny described at the MCM 2023 panel will be the emergence of the Extinction, which will end Season 2. With all of that out of the way, I just want to say thank you all for watching the video. If you have any theories of your own, feel free to share them in the comments, and I'll happily engage with them. Sorry this wasn't the TMA Explained video, but I do promise that it's coming. I'm excited for y'all to see it. If you haven't done so already, feel free to subscribe. If you made it all this way, I imagine you liked the content, and it would mean that you'd get to see me wrap myself in red string over Protocol for the next few years. I do have to say that I'll be really surprised if I get any of these predictions right, because we have so little to go on at the moment, but I'm really excited to find out. Once again, thank you for watching. I've been Afton G, Kier, and good night, YouTube people.